More than 2,000 years ago, China's expansion into Central Asia under the Han Dynasty gave rise to the historic Silk Road, a trade route that connected Central Asia, the Middle East, East Africa, and Southern Europe. For over 1,500 years, this 4,000-mile network facilitated the exchange of commerce and culture, generating tremendous economic opportunities for individuals and nations alike. It brought unprecedented prosperity to China and significantly shaped its approach towards trade and diplomacy. Well, you know they say history always repeats itself and that sequels are always bigger than the original? China is aiming to prove both are true with its new $8 trillion Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. Announced by Xi Jinping in 2013, the BRI aspires to connect over 155 countries, covering more than 50% of the global population and representing over 60% of the world's GDP. However, concerns about China's growing global influence, debt diplomacy tactics, and the project's future under the leadership of Xi's eventual successor have all raised eyebrows. Nevertheless, many countries are eager to participate in China's BRI, but despite its similarities to the ancient Silk Road, China's BRI is not merely a modern-day replica. Rather, it represents something entirely unprecedented. This video is about how China plans to leverage the BRI to shape the future of the world economy and establish a new world order. The BRI is the brainchild of Xi Jinping, who since 2013 has been envisioning changing the economic world order through the development of two highly ambitious and very expensive trade routes. But what does it actually mean to establish a new world order? The term New World Order refers to a significant shift and transformation in the global political landscape. This shift can result from changes in political ideology, altercations in the balance of power among nations, or significant geopolitical events. The concept of a new world order is often associated with the idea of global governance, where nations work together to address global challenges that exceed the capacity of a single country to solve. In a new world order, countries may collaborate to establish new norms, rules, and institutions that guide international relations and address shared problems such as climate change, pandemics, and conflict. Today, the U.S. has the most considerable role in shaping the world order, and it's due to its economic, military, cultural, diplomatic, and technological influences. As a result, the U.S.'s global affairs directly shapes the policies and dynamics of other countries, and for these reasons, emerging powers like China often oppose the political and economic ground rules established by the liberal Western order. Rather than conform, China is choosing to evolve into a revolutionary power that may establish its own norms and institutions. The BRI certainly enables China to make a significant show of strength against the U.S. Most of China's international trade transits by sea through the Malacca Strait near Singapore, a major U.S. ally. The BRI aims to establish China's own trade routes and increase other countries' dependence on China, therefore expanding its global influence. As recently as 2021, Xi Jinping publicly criticized U.S. global leadership and interference in other countries' internal affairs. He stated that the rules set by one or several countries should not be imposed on others, and the unilateralism of individual countries should not give the whole world a rhythm. But isn't that exactly what the BRI might want to achieve? The BRI is primarily about strategic economic interests, much like the U.S.'s Marshall Plan of 1948, which provided economical aid to Europe to prevent the spread of communism. But today, China, not Russia, will bring about the largest geopolitical change of this century. The era of Western political and economic domination is ending, and for the first time in modern history, the East and the West can coexist on equal terms, making it unclear whether the world is moving towards a unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar order. A bipolar order is a global structure dominated by two superpowers, where the majority of global influence is evenly split. The Cold War era, marked by the US and the Soviet Union, is perhaps the best example of this. In a multipolar order, the world isn't dominated by one or two ideologies, but several competing factions. Everybody has their considerable clout, but no one is dominating anyone. And in a unipolar world order, one country is the solo superpower calling the shots. Perhaps the best example is the world order that we're in today, where the US has been in the driver's seat since the end of the Cold War. I suppose only time and the comment sections will tell which of these three power structures the future may actually hold, but China's bid for world domination, interestingly enough, was actually a response to a major global disservice by the United States, the 2008 global financial crash. In response to their share of the financial turmoil, China rolled out a massive $650 billion stimulus package, majorly targeting infrastructure. While this helped China's domestic market in the short term, it soon left the market oversaturated with construction companies. This saturation paved the way for the BRI, offering Chinese firms opportunity on the international stage. In China, the BRI is actually the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road Initiative. Its official name was the Silk Road Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road Development Strategy, but not only is that a mouthful, the assertiveness of the word strategy didn't play well. It seemed too world domination-y and was rebranded to an initiative. It's like rebranding a shark as a friendly fish. So, what is in a name? Well, One Belt is shorthand for the Silk Road Economic Belt, a set of proposed roads and railways through the landlocked regions of Central Asia. You'd think the One Road part of the One Belt, One Road initiative would be about the roads, but actually, One Road refers to the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, the Indo-Pacific sea routes from Southeast Asia to South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. The crown jewel of the Belt component in China's Belt and Road Initiative is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. This 3,000-kilometer infrastructure network is designed to provide an alternative route to the Malacca Strait, allowing China to reroute its energy imports from the Middle East through Pakistan, and in doing so, enhancing its trade prospects with the energy-deficient Europe while protecting itself from the possibility of U.S. interference with trade going through the Malacca Strait. The CPEC is also a vital part of Pakistan's transformation from an agricultural economy to an industrial one, as it will bring the stable source of electricity the country so desperately needs. Pakistan's officials project that the CPEC will create 2.3 million jobs between 2015 and 2030 and add an additional 2.5% to the nation's annual GDP. As for the road half of China's BRI, and remember, the road half refers to the not road, water-based projects, China's strategy goes far beyond sidestepping the Malacca Strait. China is envisioning a global infrastructure grid that includes fuel stations, trade ports, and bridges spanning Sri Lanka, Dubai, Djibouti, Greece, Spain, and even Peru. The BRI actually encompasses over 2,600 infrastructure projects in over 100 countries, illustrating that the BRI is more of a broad economic vision than a crystallized plan. By 2027, China will have invested a staggering $1.3 trillion in the BRI. Is that how much it costs to establish a new world order? Who really knows? But to put these numbers in context, the US issued a $4 trillion infrastructure package in response to COVID. And when you compare the way that both countries spend, it's quite interesting. The most money China has ever set aside for the BRI in one given year is estimated to be around $140 billion. Meanwhile, the US just spent $814 billion providing American citizens with free money. While this certainly stimulated the economy, it also caused rampant inflation, and you can certainly build a lot of bridges either at home or abroad with that kind of money. For $6 billion, China is building the first high-speed railway in Southeast Asia, connecting the two largest cities in Singapore, a great accomplishment that costs about 1/10 of the $54 billion the United States gave to their unprofitable, failing airlines. China's $10 billion Malacca Gateway project in Malaysia involves constructing artificial islands, literally expanding Malaysia's territory for commercial and residential buildings. Several of the construction projects like the Malacca Gateway are expected to be expanded in the years to come, likely implying more of an opportunity for Chinese companies. Meanwhile, the US, despite spending nearly $200 billion of their $4 trillion on direct infrastructure projects, seems to have spent vast amounts of money on temporary relief at best and absolute nonsense at worst. Equating President Biden's infrastructure plan to Truman's Marshall Plan is respectfully ridiculous. Adjusted for inflation, the $135 billion Marshall Plan rebuilt America and revitalized the economy. Meanwhile, some of President Biden's allocations seem to lack purpose, like the $40 billion he gave away to support the already rich and grossly overpriced American universities. the excessive $120 billion given to finance K-12 schools, and the head-scratching $50 billion given to the CDC for COVID-19 management and tracking. It certainly seems as though the American spending strategy really raises some questions about its focus and long-term benefits. So if Biden's infrastructure plan isn't quite a modern-day Marshall Plan, is China's BRI really a modern-day equivalent of the ancient Silk Road? The simple answer is no, because the BRI is far more ambitious, strategic, and complex. Differences between the BRI and the ancient Silk Road are vast. Firstly, the Silk Road, while it benefited from government intervention, predominantly developed naturally over time, while the BRI is a state-engineered strategy from head to toe. Second, the BRI's scope is enormous. Its partners include over 155 countries, 30 of the world's largest financial institutions, and it engulfs 65% of the world's population and 40% of the world GDP. The Silk Road, in contrast, almost seems novel. Furthermore, the BRI, rather than promoting trade, aims to reshape global economics. It wants to connect economies across continents, integrate commodity-rich nations into China's orbit, and even alleviate the Chinese yuan as a global currency. While the Silk Road was predominantly about trade, China's BRI is about amassing geopolitical power, and that difference explains China's unique approach to financing the BRI. An approach that significantly differs the infrastructure projects funded by Western organizations like the IMF or World Bank, which usually set clear conditions for their aid. China instead sidesteps these formalities and directly offers money for infrastructure. The strings are attached later. As illustrated in our video on the UN's $50 billion oil for food scandal, even well-intentioned programs can face major operational challenges, especially corruption. In the case of the BRI, the secrecy surrounding the deals makes it hard to track who's managing the money and the projects. This lack of transparency has led to failures in the past. For instance, in Ecuador, a dam built by Chinese firms was found to have over 7,000 cracks and was located near an active volcano. That is pretty good cause for concern, considering these obscenely large sums of money are not just investments in infrastructure, they're loans. And the thing about loans is you gotta pay them back, but many of these countries simply can't afford to do that, creating what is called a debt trap. A debt trap is a situation where a borrower is forced to take on new loans simply to repay existing ones, getting trapped in a never-ending cycle of debt. China has in this context been accused of debt trap diplomacy, which describes an international financial relationship where a creditor, country, or institution exercises increased political leverage and control over a borrowing nation. Laos's debt to China is estimated at 45% of its GDP. Djibouti's debt to China is estimated at 70% of its GDP. Now, if this sounds unsustainable, it's because it is, but don't worry, China is always willing to refinance. When Sri Lanka had been borrowing billions from China to build a new trading port, it was struggling to repay its loans and the port was still far from completion. This led to the Sri Lankan government selling an 85% stake in the port to China, who issued another $1.15 billion for the project's completion, upon receiving a 99-year lease to control the port, providing China more influence over a very pivotal part of Asia. And herein lies the problem. If China controls Sri Lanka's second largest port for the next century, what does that say about Sri Lanka's sovereignty? In light of all of this, the West isn't just lying down without a fight. They know that disrespecting third world countries' sovereignty was their thing from way back when. And so in June 2021, the White House announced that President Biden had met with G7 leaders to discuss strategic competition with China and commit to concrete actions to help fill the $40 trillion infrastructure gap in the developing world. They developed the B3W, or Build Back Better World, a values-driven infrastructure partnership led by major democracies. This announcement was meant to serve as a unified vision for global infrastructure development, a counter-jab to hinder China's bid for a new world order. But despite having some cool American sound bites about democracy and cooperation, this plan, surprisingly, has even less tangible details than the BRI. It has no budget, no timetable, and there's not even a clear indication of exactly who is going to be in charge. So, in some sense, The BRI has created yet another axis of competition between China and the West. But as the plot thickens, it's unclear if the US and China are racing to see who can save more of the world or who can control it through a little thing called neocolonialism. Neocolonialism refers to global powers perpetuating colonial forms of exploitation and control through the operations of international capitalism rather than by means of direct rule. So, from the perspective of developing countries, it may not really matter whether the money comes from China or the US. It's still money, and they could still use it to their advantage. Besides, global superpowers competing to help them could mean better deals and more funding options. The World Bank estimates that the BRI alone could pull 7 million people out of extreme poverty and boost global trade by as much as 6.5%. But China isn't only aligning with some of the world's poorest countries, it's also aligning strategically with the US's allies and rivals. China has now become Saudi Arabia's largest trade partner, and all amidst a weakening relationship between Saudi and the United States. In Saudi Arabia, the BRI is positioned to align with the country's massive Vision 2030 initiative, as China and Saudi are joining forces to finance the construction of mega projects and bolster their existing energy trade. China's BRI has also substantially shaped their trade relations with Russia, which have only increased in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. In the last year, China's imports from Russia, including discounted oil, coal, and metals, has risen by 16%, while China's exports to Russia have increased by 91%. Despite rumors that China's BRI investments in Russia slowed down after Ukraine's invasion, China actually invested nearly $2 billion into Russian construction projects in 2022. So although some of China's projects in Russia aren't officially labeled as BRI investments, that's just a matter of labeling. In practice, these investments serve the same goals as the BRI initiatives. So while it's undeniable that China's BRI is certainly ambitious and vast, that doesn't mean it's immune to flaws and challenges, which we haven't really discussed, as China has been fueling the development of the BRI on a true double-edged sword: bad debt. Today, China is the largest lender in the world, and it's not even close. In total, the Chinese state and its subsidiaries have lent out about $1.5 trillion in direct loans and trade credits to more than 150 countries around the globe. This has turned China into the world's largest official creditor by a mile, surpassing the values issued out by both the World Bank and IMF combined. In fact, outstanding debt to China now exceeds more than 5% of the global GDP. The fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, however, has left China and many other indebted BRI partners battling a host of context-specific economic headaches, leaving more and more of these countries unable to pay China's loans. According to a recent study, since 2013, China has had to bail out 20 countries by essentially delaying or restructuring $230 billion worth of loans. This happens through one of two methods. The first is China just gives them more money. The second method is through swap lines, where Chinese central banks tell other countries' central banks that they can convert as much of their local currency into Chinese yuan. For instance, China has a swap line with Argentina, who in the past 8 years has had to use the swap line 8 times, bolstering its foreign reserves by converting a whole load of pesos into Chinese yuan. These foreign reserves help Argentina more easily pay off international creditors by converting yuan to US dollars. But is this economically viable for China? China has set up swap lines with 40 countries to promote the use of the Chinese yuan in international trade, but this has only been used by countries struggling to pay back the loans. The number of financial bailouts has increased exponentially during COVID, going from $1 billion in 2011 to $40 billion in 2021. The implications of this mean that a quarter of China's BRI loans have been defaulted on and required restructuring. Now, while a part of this can be blamed on the COVID-related global slowdown, there's also an argument to be made that the Chinese government has acted recklessly with the issuing of these loans. Just look at its $1 billion loan to Montenegro to build a road that's going nowhere, I guess, considering the development of the project is far from finished and riddled with corruption allegations. Sri Lanka similarly borrowed billions to build the Lotus Tower, a vanity project that isn't expected to generate substantial revenue streams for the country. It seems piling on more debt can certainly be a one-way ticket through financial quicksand, as we've seen in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Zambia, as well as several other countries who all ran to the IMF when they were unable to pay their loans to China. But perhaps if you're China, a bit of bad debt is a small inconvenience when you have your mind on world domination. But in the absence of establishing a new world order, all this bad debt must certainly be a concern for China's financial future. As Michael always says on EE, no one can predict the future, least of all economists, and that certainly holds true in a world where the risk analysis of China's loans have completely changed for the worse in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, COVID or no COVID, the BRI, for the reasons we'll outline in the last chapter of this video, ultimately is not going to be enough to put forward a new world order. China's Belt and Road Initiative is undeniably audacious, seeming like a modern reboot of the Silk Road. But as in any epic video, our subject's ambition is often their Achilles heel. The BRI alone may increase China's influence over the global economy, but alone it won't be enough for China to establish a new world order, impose a unipolar order, or even force us into a bipolar world order. Some of the most critical factors that ensure the US will, at least in the short term, remain as the world's dominant superpower is the US's superior military, the perception of the US dollar, their unparalleled competitive and innovative markets, and the country's status as a reserve currency. With a network of military bases spanning the globe, the US holds a distinct advantage in both reach and technological prowess over China's rapidly modernizing armed forces. This edge is not just strategic, but also financial. In 2022, the US invested close to $880 billion in its military, accounting for 39% of global defense spending and nearly quadrupling China's budget of nearly $300 billion. Furthermore, this vast difference in resources and global presence makes the US a preferred partner for countries seeking both economic and military alliances. Financial prosperity is also a key to establishing a new world order, and the US greatly benefits from its well-established and easily accessible capital markets, which attracts investors from all over the world. China's financial markets, by comparison, lack transparency and have been subject to scandal and criticism in the past, hindering the country's ability to evoke confidence from the international community. More significantly, the BRI's potential to increase debt levels in partner countries could make it difficult for them to achieve long-term financial prosperity. The yuan's recent deflationary crisis only adds to this uncertainty. This deflationary pressure not only impacts the domestic economy in China, but could also spill over to impacting global markets. As the Chinese yuan becomes more expensive, this will decrease the demand for Chinese goods further, slowing down China's already struggling post-COVID economic rebound. In the quest to establish a new world order, a robust and diversified economy is critical. The US economy excels in this regard, boasting a well-rounded blend of services and manufacturing, underscored by its technological leadership. The US is most notably a dominant force in the globally expanding software-as-a-service sector and the broader digital economy. Contrastingly, China's economy is largely anchored in manufacturing, making it vulnerable to global demand fluctuations. The US also leads in technological innovation and intellectual property protection, attracting both investments and global partnerships. Conversely, concerns over IP theft in China make many countries and businesses hesitant to collaborate on technological fronts. Finally, the status of a reserve currency is a key pillar in establishing a new world order. Currently, the US dollar reigns supreme, widely used in global trade and held by central banks. The Chinese yuan, on the other hand, lacks this level of global trust. And while the US financial system is transparent and well-established, attracting international investments, China's financial system is still evolving and lacks the same level of global confidence. China may aim to elevate the yuan through debt diplomacy strategies, but its business culture and innovation ecosystem are still in development. The US, on the other hand, backed by strong intellectual property protections and a culture of innovation, has the upper hand in both financial stability and entrepreneurial opportunity. So, what world order does the future actually hold? Ian Arthur Bremer, a political scientist and a consultant who advises on global political developments, anticipates a future governed by multiple geopolitical factions. The narrative isn't just about US or China, but a broader spectrum of influential entities. So despite the grand scale of the BRI, it represents just one part of a multifaceted global power play. It's important to remember, though, that China's ambitions, though seemingly driven by economic interests, are also rooted in its history. As we've explored in our previous episode on China's century of humiliation, its efforts to reclaim its place as a global superpower are shaped by a desire to overcome past grievances with the West.